Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to the second video in my Thor cosplay series. In this one, I'm going to be talking about the scales on his arms in most of the movies. Um, they're one of the trickier parts of the costume, and they're one of the most visually obvious parts of the costume. They really kind of jump out at people when they're just sort of seeing you across the way. So the difference between doing them really well and not so well is super apparent. Which again, it kind of sounds vaguely douchey, like people do terrible Thor costumes, but it's really not. It's mostly that I feel like I've figured something out for these. It's kind of neat. That's something I'd like to see more people trying out. I get a lot of people asking me about how I do the arms on these costumes. That's kind of one of the most common questions. So I sort of wanted to share that with you guys for you to draw your own conclusions on. So, over the course of these three costumes, I've tried, well, mostly one thing. A couple iterations on one thing, but mostly one thing. And that is these craft foam scales. A lot of people, when they're doing the scales for these armor, one of the go-to solutions I see a lot is quilted fabric that they paint to look metallic, which I absolutely don't want to make it sound like anybody who does this for their costume isn't doing it right. But having the craft foam scales on there adds a lot of nice weight and nice texture to the costume. Which I did use this for some parts of the arm, and I'll get to that when I get to the second set I did, because this is the first set, which is more, this is the jumping off point of where I started learning about what to do and what not to do on these guys. This is built on top of like one of those super cheap Batman costumes, so it's got that puffy shoulder padding, and I added a little bit of padding to whatever that muscle is called. I'll put it up on the screen now when I look it up later, because adding a little bit of extra padding to those two muscles does most of the work for making you look muscular. And then I just spray painted the craft foam silver, which did not work so well. Just spray painting craft foam leaves a very spongy, matte kind of finish. It's just not good. Afterwards, I went over it with a silver Sharpie, which made it look a little bit more metallic, but, kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic on this one. And I didn't make it long enough to really have to worry about the joints. It wasn't far enough up the shoulder to worry about that, and it didn't actually get down to my elbow. So this was an early effort, not bad, a little bit of a cheat. The second set of arms I did for my Thor the Dark World costume turned out a lot better. These guys are where I really sort of... Which is to say, initially, what I did is I took the same craft foam scales, glued it onto the quilted fabric, which actually works great as a guide for keeping your scales straight and in line, and then glued that onto the foam padding to add the musculature underneath the cloth. So scales, cloth, muscle padding on this guy, which worked out pretty well. Now on the scales themselves, initially what I tried to do is I tried metallic contact paper over the top of the craft foam, which worked great until it didn't. And there were some peeling issues that were not quite catastrophic, but it wasn't pretty. It was a bad scene. I was shedding some scales. So after that first con I tried that at, I peeled all of the contact paper off of these guys and painted over it with black fabric paint, and then painted that silver, which is what has got this really nice metallic, but not too metallic finish. Again, I specifically mentioned it was black fabric paint with silver over the top of it. That'll be important when I talk about the next guy. Now, for the parts where the arm has to flex a little bit more, here at the elbow and at the armpit, I actually did not put scales there. It was initially just the contact paper. When I peeled that off, I just painted these sections with the fabric paint, which, allows it to flex there, and it still looks pretty good. Now, I say pretty good because it does look kind of scruffy. Again, this was where I peeled off that contact paper, and that left it really rough because there were a few spots I had to super glue, and yeah, it's just a little bit scruffy there. So if you did the same thing where you've got scales over most of the arm and then the quilted fabric over the spots where it has to flex the most, you could actually achieve a really good look with that and keep the flexibility you need, because doing it all with scales just would not work. You would not be able to flex your arm worth beans. And you must flex. As Thor, you must flex. The other thing worth saying on this is I have removed part of this arm because on the design of Thor the Dark World, the scales actually go a reasonable way into the chest. Thor's armor kind of has a cutout about here. Man, I should really be doing this on the shoulder that has Thor on the shirt, because you see, my shoulder is Thor. That's okay. I feel bad for that one. So, backing up. The scales continued down the armpit and a reasonable way into the chest. On Thor the Dark World. Now, how that was significant because I actually didn't attach the arms onto a shirt or anything. The arms were attached entirely onto a separate vest I wore over a shirt. So the arms were just sort of hooked to each other that I wore over the top of another shirt, so I could just peel the arms off when I needed to take a break and cool off, which I would say is kind of the better way to do it. I've tried. I'll get to that, but it's a warm costume. Every once in a while, you just kind of have to take a break and cool off. So, I think that's about everything I needed to talk about on this guy. This guy was, of course, a significant step up from the Avengers costume, but when I went through and tried to make a better version for Avengers 2, Age of Ultron, it was not necessarily a step forward, so let's talk about that. One of the biggest things I wanted to change on these guys was to add more musculature, because where that adds a little bit of bulk, it doesn't add a whole lot of definition. So I wanted to change that on this guy, and yeah, there were some problems. So first of all, I glued the foam muscle pads onto the outside of fabric and then scales on top of that, which seems like it was not the way to go, because wherever there was a seam, it tends to split the scales apart pretty bad. I was hoping it would not, but I was wrong. I was incorrect. So this video is all about you guys learning from my mistakes and, you know, what I got wrong and what I got right. It's just another data point. Draw your own conclusions. Some of the other spots where I kind of, you know, where this took a step back is you'll notice the finish on this guy is not quite as metallic. I actually painted this guy with metallic silver fabric paint, which ended up a lot less metallic than the glossy black fabric paint, and then painting that silver. So if you're trying anything like this, that is what I would recommend, is foam scales, fabric on the outside, black metallic fabric paint. Seems like the better way to go. So this guy I actually used just like thinner craft foam for the joints, which didn't turn out too bad, but didn't turn out great either. Craft foam does not really hold up well to that kind of repeated flexing. I mean, it didn't tear off or anything, but it just kind of scrunched. So it's kind of sad that this guy was honestly a step back from my previous version, but he really was. And he was attached onto an actual shirt, because I thought, you know, attaching him onto an actual shirt, let me back up a step to justify that decision a little bit more, because I mean it was not inherently terrible. So the Thor the Dark World arm was built onto that quilted fabric. Now that quilted fabric has extra batting and stuff in it, so it's very warm. This guy I built onto very light breathable sport shirt fabric, thinking that extra breathability would keep them from being too warm and I could just wear them all day, but that was not really the case. So if it's possible to build your arm onto breathable fabric, do it. Yeah, have the fabric outside the foam plates is what I'd recommend. I don't know. I think that's about all I had to say on those guys. Let's talk about what I'm going to do next, because there's still not any information about Thor Ragnarok out yet, so I don't know if I'm doing anything for that. But I do want to make some improvements to this to wear this around next year, because I am going to go off of my Thor the Dark World. I'm going to fix it up and I'm going to make it even better. So I'm going to add more shoulder padding to this guy. I'm going to cut this out and replace it with more lightweight breathable fabric with the scale pattern printed on it in a much cleaner fashion. I'm not going to add too much further in, because again, there's that blue fabric there, so that means I won't have to add a whole lot, and it'll still be pretty flexible as far as the armpit goes. But yeah, I'm gonna. All in all, these guys turned out the best of the three, so I'm gonna make them even better. I might even add some EL wire for some lightning going down the arm if I build myself a light up Mjolnir. I think that's about what I have to say about these guys. If you have any questions about anything I did on these, or anything you're working on, I'll be happy to answer them. Just leave them in the comments below, and I'll get back to you as best I can. Thanks for your time, guys. I'll see you in the next video. I'm totally not copying Markiplier. I just have no idea how to end a video.